Welcome, Crossroads family. How are you today? Today, we're going to be talking about church revitalization. Now, many of you know that I worked for the North American Mission Board for a while, and my whole focus was on church planting. And I knew that we needed to do a lot of that. But it wasn't until I got into this role as the AMS for Crossroads that I really hit home as to the need for revitalization. Well, our guest today is somebody that I would say has been down that road. And as a result, has developed a ministry to help churches and pastors walk through and down that path. So, Terry, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're doing now?
Okay. Yeah, great to be with you, Chris. I'm excited about this opportunity to talk about church revitalization. That's the topic of my heart these days. And obviously, I lead an organization and ministry called Small Church USA that is the focus of revitalization, where we help pastors and churches around the country and even some internationally right now. That churches are just kind of stuck, status quo in decline, and pastors are like I'm just not exactly sure what to do next. Can you give me some steps forward? And so that's what we get the privilege of doing, working with pastors all the time. We have cohorts. It's a revolving door, so some cohorts roll off and some roll on. So we are never in a month where we aren't working with cohorts and pastors. So it's very exciting.
Good stuff. Well, tell us about your journey. That how did we get here?
Yeah, so like I was a youth pastor in Indianapolis for 12 years, so a very metropolitan area, an associate pastor in Columbus, Ohio for 2 years, so a very metropolitan area. And then God called my wife Kelly and I to come to Crawfordsville, Indiana, West Central Indiana, about 15,000 people. So small town America, completely different than where we had been. And we were asked to come revitalize a church that had been in steady decline for 10 years, had gotten down to 20 elderly people. And so I was supposed to come in and revitalize this, my first lead pastor position, and I had no idea what I was doing, right? And it's like, oh my goodness, like I don't know what to do here. And that was back in the late 90s, so there really wasn't a lot of resources back then. And so our goal was really just how do we get the church healthy? And then let's see what God can do with a healthy church. And so we started working and we started praying and we started trying stuff and experimenting with different things. And somewhere along the way, in spite of us, God decided to bless. And he showed up in a really big way. And the church started to grow and we got healthy. And then over the next 24 years, the church grew and grew and grew. And today our church runs about 1,000 people on Sunday. And God did immeasurably more than we could have ever asked or imagined. And just did this really big thing. And so a few years ago, after pastoring the church for 24 years, I handed it off to a next gen pastor who's now my pastor. So instead of being the lead elder at the church, I am now a lay elder at the church, which is still great that we still get to be a part of our church family. But we started this ministry called Small Church USA because in the 24 years that God was doing this really cool story, a lot of pastors and churches reached out and said, how did you do it? Can you help us? And I didn't have a lot of bandwidth when I was leading the church to take on a bunch of other church projects. So we started Small Church USA to intentionally and on a much broader scale help all these pastors and churches that have been reaching out to us. And so in the last couple of years since we've launched this thing, we've helped 149 different churches in 21 different states, and we have some pastors in Jamaica and England that are engaged with us. And so God's taking it on an international flavor, even though it's called Small Church USA.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
figure that, right?
Might have to change that to Small Church International. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? We'll see
Yeah,
what God
yeah.
wants to do.
That's good. So, all right. So, guys calling you up. When you start, in kind of this process, what do you, and I think that you and I were talking about this, that, it's getting in that leadership place, and all of a sudden you realize that maybe they didn't cover everything in your education.
Yeah.
And so what are some of the common leadership issues that you see in pastors when you start working?
Yeah, so our engagement's a year long, so we spend a really good amount of time with the pastors that engage with us. And the mission of Small Church USA is to accelerate church health through strategy and leadership. And I know for me personally, coming out of 4 years of intensive Bible college training to go into pastoral ministry, they taught me how to study the Bible, but I didn't have one class on leadership and I didn't have one class on strategy. And it seems like as we've been working with pastors now for multiple years, that is the piece that's missing. Is no one's ever really spent time with them to help them grow in their personal leadership, because we believe if you can grow the leader, you can best grow the organization that way first. And then a lot of guys never had any sessions on strategy, like how do you put together a strategic plan, or how do you figure out where you're stuck, and then what do you do about it? That kind of a thing. Man, the pastors we're working with, that just really is resonating with them. That these are the areas, like one pastor said, man, and just a couple weeks ago, he said to me, he goes, man, when I went to Bible college, they said, just go preach the word and everything else will take care of itself. And he goes, I've been preaching the word for a lot of years and everything else isn't taking care of itself. So what am I missing here? So some of those practical things I think are what the guys are needing.
That's good. So, in starting with the pastor, it's you're kind of focusing on even their personal health, right? I mean, their spiritual health, and kind of helping them think through that, right?
Yeah, so when we start with a 2.5 day retreat where all the guys come into Crawfordsville, and we put the cohorts together and guys get to know each other because they're from all over the country and a lot of them don't know each other, and they get to know us and we get to know them in a very personal setting. And every guy gets a leadership profile before he comes, and it's a behavioral profile, so it shows a leader where they can improve in their leadership skills to be a better leader for their team. And it's called a 360-degree profile. It's an integrous profile, and which means that I do an evaluation on myself online, and then 6 people that know me do the same evaluation on me. So a lot of leadership profiles are me assessing me, and I can make that thing say anything I want it to say.
Mm.
But when you get 6 people doing that on you, then you can see if you have blind spots, and you can see if people need more of a behavior or less of a behavior out of you. And it's very enlightening, but to be perfectly honest, it's also very painful
Mm.
to go, oh, this is how people see me. But if leaders want to grow, that feedback is just really valuable for helping us grow in our personal leadership skills.
Yeah, that's good. Well, and so, I know that, I'm because I had a very similar experience that, my very first church, they basically thought that the solution was we'll just hire the young guy who has kids, and then that's going to fix everything.
Mhm.
And I walked into that, and I didn't know what I didn't know. You know what I mean? So I didn't even know what to ask. So I'm sure that there are guys that are watching this thing and going, yeah, you know what? I think we may need some help. But how would you help them think through maybe some warning signs that the church, and themselves need some of this kind of coaching?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to measure the church and whether or not it needs help is to just ask this question: are we fulfilling the Great Commission? Right? Because the mission is the Great Commission. So Are we reaching our community? Are we seeing people saved? Are the baptismal waters getting stirred? Are we making not just disciples, but are we making disciple makers? And that means that our people ought to be discipling somebody. And if those things aren't happening, then I would say the church needs to take a look and go, okay, are we really being the church? And because if we're not fulfilling the Great Commission, then how much of a healthy church are we really being? So I think that's a really good gauge. That's really kind of the major gauging factor. But then I would also say, like, is the church just kind of stuck in the status quo? Have we just been kind of doing the same thing over and over and over again? And we open the doors on Sunday and we have church, but why are we having church and what's the purpose and what are we fulfilling and what's the vision? And, some of those kind of things I think are really helpful for a church just to step back and say, okay, let's just take an honest look at this thing.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's good. An honest look. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I think sometimes that may even be some of the things that are holding pastors specifically back. Because you really do. You got to look, man in the mirror kind of moment and say,
Yes.
where, what are some other, would you say, either habits, mindsets that could be really holding that pastor back from helping to lead in that change environment.
Yeah. I think one word sums that up, and it's the word fear.
Mm,
And whenever we go in to try to change something, there's always fear involved, and fear is very real. But fear's the thing that, like, when we talk to our pastors about, they come to our retreat and we go, okay, what's your biggest fears going home? Going, okay, we've got to try to like work through a whole year with our church on revitalization. And we get most of the common answers would be things like, man, I'm a little fearful if I can be the leader to lead through this.
mm,
And so, kind of an internal look at this is going to be challenging for me to do. I think there's fear in what if the people don't want to do this,
mm.
right? Or what if it doesn't work? One guy even said, "What if it does work?" Right? What if we end up getting all these people in our church? We don't know what to do with them, And I'm like, hey, that's a fear, but that's a great answer. And but like my challenge to pastors is always this. Back in Exodus 13 and 14, when the nation of Israel got to the banks of the Jordan River for the first time under Moses and sent the 12 spies out, they came back and they created this fear among the people
Mm.
of not looking up to rely on God, but looking within to go, we can't do this, which they couldn't without God's help. But those people allowed fear to stop them from moving forward. And in doing so, they missed out on the greatest blessings that they would have ever had in their lifetime because they let fear stop them.
Mm.
And so I think that's a really big issue um, that we all have to wrestle with when we try something new.
Sure.
Because changing something is always wrought with the possibility of failure, right? Because if we've never done it before, it may not work. But that's part of leadership as well.
That's good. Well, and when you think about those fears, I know that one of those fears, I know that I would have is, because I think if a pastor has been there for any length of time, he's going to have people that are going to support him, but at the same time, there are going to be people that, for whatever reason, are not. And so, what would be, to kind of preemptively help a pastor think through that.
Mhm.
Because he doesn't want to divide his church, right? I mean, I've been in that place where I resigned because I was like, I am not going to divide this church. That, my goal here, I mean, I don't want to push this in because there's can be a lot of fallout as a result of that. So what would be something that you would tell a pastor to help him think through, how to not unnecessarily cause division.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One of the things how we've made Small Church USA work is the pastor has to agree to work with his leadership team as they work through the year. Because what we don't want is we don't want the pastor coming back from a conference or coming back from and going, "Hey, I got this great idea, let's do this," but not bringing the people along with him. And so we mandate that we're going to walk you through this. And we have our playbook, and he has a playbook, and he has all the PowerPoints with it. And we even have a scaled down version of our playbook that he takes to gives to his leadership team. And so we lead him through a session that he then leads his leadership team through. And then they do some evaluations on their church as a team. Because we believe that Christ said it, a house divided against itself, that house will not stand.
Amen.
And so we want them to move together and not the pastor going, let's do this, but let's let the team have some self-discovery and going, let's do this. And that's why we think this thing works really well. And why we don't ride into a church on a weekend on the white horse and do an evaluation and say, you need to fix this, 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 and this. Because if we can help them self-discover what they need to fix, then they have ownership in that.
That's good.
And one of my favorite leadership phrases is actually by a guy named Todd Bolsinger. He wrote a book called Canoeing the Mountains. And the phrase is, yeah, great
That's
book.
a great
The
book.
phrase
That's a great book.
leadership, um, leadership is about disappointing your own people at a rate they can absorb.
Mm, mm,
Okay,
that's
so
good.
like let that sink in for a minute. That anytime you're going to change something, there is going to be some disappointment, and some maybe some pushback, and some people not sure and all that. But leaders have to figure out at the rate they can absorb how much we're going to push, right? And I think man, I think the parable that Christ talked about in Matthew 25, the parable of the talents, is that for leaders and pastors, we don't want to take the talent that God gave us and just bury it in the ground, right?
Mm,
The servants that took the risks and multiplied their talents, man. I mean, they took some chances, they took some risks, they made some decisions, they went for it, and God commended them for that. And so I think kind of the phrase is doing nothing is not an option, right? Because if we do nothing, where's our church going to be in 5 years?
yep.
And so we want to be proactive in some ways, and face some of those fears and try to have a plan and move forward with the plan with your people. Some of our guys, their churches are small enough, they do it with the whole church, right? They'll take a Sunday school hour or a Wednesday night or a Sunday night, and they're just taking their whole church through it with them, which I think is a great way to do that because everybody's involved in the process.
That's good. That's good. That's wise. Now, speaking of that, I mean, as far as, maybe guys are, thinking through some of the things that they've tried or done. But they're also maybe feeling a little tired, discouraged, just emotionally, spiritually drained. Last week's newsletter focused on one of our pastors that had been through some really hard times of discouragement.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so I know that if any of our guys are listening, that there's some that could be going through what, how can you help them think through this?
Yeah, yeah. Most of the guys that we work with are solo or bivocational pastors. And I think the greatest encouragement you can have is I would say don't do it alone,
Mm,
right? Isolation's really dangerous. Isolation's really lonely. And it's why we put our guys in a cohort with 5 or 6 other guys to do this journey together with. It gives them a tribe. So I think when we try to be the Lone Ranger, the Rambos out there, man, that's just a dangerous place to be in. There's lots of other people that are in the same situation that those pastors are in that are still struggling, that are trying to figure out how do we get this thing moving again. And there's just a lot of camaraderie that and really encouragement that comes through knowing I'm not the only guy that's trying to figure this out.
Mm.
And doing it with other people is just a huge priority.
Yeah, that's good. And I think that that it really is a good word, that if guys are watching this, is to know you're not alone. That the things
Right,
that
right,
you're going through, that there are many other, and that's even, sometimes we have to be careful, that I used to tell church planters, like, listen, the books that you're going to read are going to be about guys who went from 0 to 2,000, in 6 months. And
right,
here's the deal, why you're reading that is because that sells.
mhm,
Nobody,
right,
no, nobody's really excited about, well, I've been slogging through this thing and meeting with resistance for the past 10 years or whatever. And so it's just to know that, man, this is it's everybody's got to do what God has laid out for them, and everybody's path is going to be different, and you are not alone. That the things that you're
right.
feeling, others have felt before and are feeling now, just like you.
Yes, yes.
And so that's, yeah, I think that that's one of the things to help those guys. Well, what would be so let's say guys listen to this and he goes, man, well, what do I do now? What are the first steps that he needs to take?
Yeah, I think like I love the story of Nehemiah. I think there's a lot of leadership there. And I think the first thing that when you read Nehemiah, what you see that he did in when the nation of Israel needed some help was first he just got an honest assessment of where it was, right? And so as people came back, he would ask, what's happening back at home? What's happening in Jerusalem? And he got just a real sense of wow, here's really what it is. This is an honest and evaluation and look at where the situation is. The second thing Nehemiah did is then he just started praying about it, right? And asking God to lead him, guide him, direct him. And I don't think there's anything wrong with taking another step, which is asking for help.
Mm.
And he went to the king, right? And I mean that's going way up the ladder, right? Going to
Yeah.
the king. But I don't think there's anything wrong with asking for help. Asking for help, asking somebody to walk alongside of you, is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of wisdom.
That's right.
And so I think finding people that can walk with you through the journey is a huge step to take. And then, like I said, I think just saying, hey, doing nothing is not an option, right? So let's try something. And like I told our people when I came to those 20 elderly people when we first came to our church back in 1998, I said, hey, like we have to do some things here. We're not going to survive. And so I'd like our motto to be this: let's be willing to try. And if it doesn't work, we won't do it again. But let's not be afraid to try
Good.
something different. And you set a culture of doing that we're going to give this a shot. Like it's how many of us coach softball or baseball with our kids, and we're like hey, go down swinging, right? Don't stand up there, just watch the ball go
What's
by
over
three
that?
times.
Yeah.
Take a swing at that ball. And so I think sometimes pastors say, hey, let's take a swing at it, and maybe God will give you the direction to hit the ball. Maybe it'll go somewhere, and we can rejoice in the victories.
Absolutely, man. It's interesting you say that. I remember when, man, I was just that first time of in my Christian walk where I was feeling called to the ministry, and I went to my pastor, and at the time I was actually in the Air Force, and it was interesting. He came because the neat thing about that kind of ministry is that this was overseas at the time, that you generally would only have 4 years. I was in the Air Force, so that was generally the length of our term there, and so you only have 4 years with anybody at any time. And he said, "Listen," he said, "let me tell you something." He said, "I want you to try everything in this place." He said, "I don't care what it is." He said,
Mm,
"You try, and you're gonna know right away if God is wanting you to do this or that or the other thing." And he said, if it doesn't work, don't do it anymore. And now you know. And now you know that, hey, listen, I gave it a shot. And I think that,
Right.
the beauty, just like you were saying, you're setting a culture of like, the world is not going to end if we try something and it doesn't work.
Right.
It's like
Right.
nobody's going
And
to
that
take
comes
away your
back
birth.
to the fear factor
Yeah,
thing again,
exactly.
right? Yeah, right.
Exactly. No, that's really good. Well, Terry, man, thanks so much for your time today. Now, let's say again, a guy's interested, or maybe he wants to know more about what you're doing. What do they need to do?
Yeah, they can go on our website, smallchurchusa.com,
Okay.
and they can get a hold of us there and kind of check things out. In fact, we're just launching our new website. It might go live this afternoon.
Oh, wow.
So excited about that. And or they can get a hold of me at Terry at smallchurchusa.com. That's my email address. And reaching out to us, and we'd love to talk to them and have a conversation. That'd be fantastic.
That's good. Well, and we'll have that information in the description below for this. So, Pastor, if you're out there, you want to know more, you want to have a conversation with Terry, he's an encourager and somebody that can just be a good friend, maybe just to listen to you. And
Mhm.
so, again, thanks, Terry. Thanks for your work. Thanks for your time today. And man, thanks, Crossroads family, for tuning in. And we'll see you the next time.
Thanks, Chris.
You bet.